The Old West earned its reputation for being untamed and unpredictable, a reflection of the bravery and resilience needed to navigate its vast expanse. Pioneers faced constant hazards, and the harsh landscape of the prairie offered little solace. With limited access to medical care, the challenges of survival were compounded by the cultural and linguistic barriers with Native American tribes, adding to the uncertainties of life in this rugged terrain. In fact, daily life in the Wild West was also very harsh. The scarcity of wells and water pumps in the Great Plains and Mountain West throughout the 19th century made obtaining clean water a significant challenge, while indoor plumbing was a luxury confined to major cities on the East Coast. Even urban residents had limited access to modern conveniences compared to today's standards. Life in the frontier demanded extraordinary ingenuity and determination. Pioneering families traversing the plains had to contend with basic hygiene challenges, as their resources and knowledge were far less advanced than what we have now. Although information on domestic practices became more accessible by the late 19th century, the dissemination of this knowledge was gradual and uneven. Before these advancements, domestic routines and hygiene were vastly different from contemporary practices. These 10 facts about daily life in the Old West will reveal just how surprising and demanding these conditions truly were. Sketchy houses meant unwanted house guests. Throughout the prairie, settlers hastily constructed sod houses as they moved westward, resulting in structures that were rudimentary and far from secure. Built directly from the earth, these homes were poorly insulated and often left unsealed, making them susceptible to various environmental challenges and infestations. Most of these dwellings featured dirt floors and frequently leaked roofs, leading to a persistent problem with pests and wildlife. Families often found themselves sharing their homes with insects and occasionally snakes. To combat the relentless dust, which was so pervasive that mothers poured greasy dishwater on the floors to suppress it, they inadvertently created an environment that attracted even more insects. This made the living conditions even more uncomfortable and unsanitary. Roof leaks were a common issue, exacerbated by the sod's inability to withstand harsh weather conditions, which frequently led to crumbling walls and soaked interiors. Homesteaders often reported tales of leaking ceilings, damp bed linens, and soiled clothing. Without running water in most frontier settlements, maintaining hygiene was exceptionally challenging. Pioneers had to transport water from nearby streams and creeks in large buckets, boiling it to kill any germs they were aware of. They then used harsh homemade lye soaps for cleaning, which were tough on the skin and often ineffective at eliminating bacteria. This created a cycle of unsanitary conditions that would be shocking to today's standards of cleanliness. Guessing and experimenting with germ concerns. Today, the principles of germ science are deeply ingrained in our daily routines. We routinely wash our hands, disinfect surfaces, and clean dishes and utensils, which now seem like basic practices. However, in the 19th century, germ theory was just emerging. While scientists on the East Coast, particularly from Ivy League institutions, were making pioneering discoveries about disease transmission, these insights were not yet widespread. During this period, household cleaning products were not available. Lysol, for instance, was only introduced in 1889 and did not gain widespread popularity until later. By that time, many pioneers had already established their homes. In the frontier regions, knowledge of germs and disinfectants was scarce, and supplies were minimal. Families often shared the same cup and ate from the same plate, while saloon patrons commonly used a single bar towel to clean their mouths. Homemade lye soaps, while somewhat effective in the absence of commercial cleaners, were harsh and produced inconsistent results. However, progress was on the horizon. The publication of The Happy Healthy Home Guide in 1887 marked a significant step forward. This guide, which spread throughout the country, presented germ theory and information about viruses in an accessible manner. For many in the West, this guide was a crucial development, providing much-needed knowledge that began to improve domestic hygiene and home healthcare practices. Outhouses in the Old West. Indoor plumbing would have significantly eased domestic life for pioneer families, but it was a luxury they could only anticipate towards the end of the era of westward expansion. In the meantime, outhouses were the primary solution for sanitation needs. Although families had chamber pots for nighttime use, small lidded porcelain bowls kept beside the bed for emergencies, Having a waste container so close to one's sleeping area was far from ideal. Outhouses were a common feature at every home and settlement across the Great Plains. These basic wooden structures typically had two seats, a larger one for adults and a smaller one for children. Many outhouses also had a small, crescent-shaped opening in the door to provide light and ventilation. This design element, often seen as a crescent moon, was a practical adaptation for the limited conditions. Due to their inexpensive and functional design, outhouses were ubiquitous throughout the Wild West. They were found behind nearly every saloon, hotel, and public building. Some outhouses, due to high usage, were even built with two stories, while others had multiple seats to accommodate many users simultaneously. The resulting odors from these makeshift facilities were likely quite strong. Moreover, outhouses often served purposes beyond sanitation. They sometimes became private retreats where individuals could engage in discrete activities such as reading or drinking. The most heavily used outhouses could turn into unmanageable waste pits, and some even became hiding spots for illicit items. Local sheriffs frequently reported finding hidden weapons and other contraband within these structures. Forget toilet paper? For early pioneers, personal hygiene in outhouses was far from ideal. Toilet paper, as we know it, was not available in the Old West, nor was it widely used anywhere in the country at that time. Toilet tissue was first developed in New York City during the 1850s, initially marketed as medicated paper. However, it was sold in costly, inefficient sheets, making it impractical to ship in large quantities to settlers moving westward. It wasn't until 1890 that toilet paper began to be mass-produced in rolls, and a year later, the toilet paper holder was invented. By the early 1900s, advancements included softer and higher quality tissues, which were significant improvements. Unfortunately, these developments arrived too late to benefit most of the pioneers, as the major westward expansion had largely concluded by the 1890s. For many pioneer families, the farmer's almanac became an unconventional but practical solution. Since its inception in 1792, readers had been drilling holes in the almanac, which they would then hang from a nail in their outhouse. Those who could read used it for bathroom reading and would tear off a page for cleaning up afterward. By the early 20th century, the almanac's publishers began pre-drilling holes in their publications for this specific use. For those without access to the almanac, other materials were used in its place. Pioneers often resorted to soft plants, scraps of paper, soft corn cobs, or even reusable rags. Considering the hygiene conditions of the time, it's unsettling to imagine the appearance and odor of those recycled rags. Lice had their run of the place. In areas with inadequate hygiene and unreliable clean water, pests and parasites thrived. Lice were particularly troublesome in pioneer homes. The lack of indoor plumbing or bathtubs meant that washing hair was infrequent. Although some pioneers tried to manage their hair by brushing it regularly, this was only a partial solution. Shampoo was not introduced until just before 1900 and was initially developed in Germany. Consequently, its availability in the United States was limited and slow, with mail orders taking considerable time. Until domestic production increased in the 20th century, pioneers had to rely on alternative methods, such as using eggs, vinegar, and other household items to clean their hair. Newspapers made efforts to share useful information, such as a 1900 report from a West Coast publication, suggesting that glycerin could make girls' hair shinier. However, the effectiveness and potential side effects of such remedies were not well documented. In the absence of effective hair care products, pioneer families frequently endured severe lice infestations. The treatments available were harsh and often ineffective. Some doctors recommended using rancid water from boiled potatoes to wash the hair, while others suggested applying a mixture of vinegar and lard. When these homemade remedies failed, pioneers had to painstakingly remove lice by hand using specialized combs. This laborious process was a particularly unpleasant aspect of daily life on the frontier. Frontier dentistry. By the mid-19th century, toothpaste was becoming somewhat common, and dentists had also become more prevalent. Many pioneers understood the importance of oral hygiene, so some form of dental care was accessible, albeit basic. By the 1870s, prominent Western leaders were advocating for better dental practices, and newspaper editorials encouraged homesteaders to include oral care in their health routines. However, dental care was still far from the advanced standards we have today. The quality of dental services on the frontier was highly variable. Infections and complications from procedures were frequent, and the use of anesthesia was rare. Although anesthesia had been introduced on the East Coast as early as 1846, transporting it to the frontier was challenging, and many dentists in Western states could not obtain it. Even when available, its efficacy was inconsistent. In some cases, opium was used as a substitute for anesthesia, but the dosage often varied significantly, leading to either ineffective relief or dangerous outcomes. A notorious story involves the outlaw Clay Allison, who in 1886 allegedly sought revenge on a Wyoming Territory dentist for a botched extraction. According to the tale, the dentist removed the wrong tooth, prompting Allison to retaliate by forcibly extracting one of the dentist's molars himself. While this story may be embellished, it aligns with Allison's violent reputation. After his death, his tombstone bore the inscription, "He never killed a man that did not need killing," suggesting that even his approach to revenge may have been in keeping with his fierce demeanor. Filthy brothels of the Old West. In the early years of the Old West, the majority of settlers were men. As America expanded into the Great Plains, many single men ventured west in search of wealth, fame, and adventure, often leaving their families behind. Consequently, women and children were relatively rare in the frontier regions, particularly during the initial phase of settlement. However, among those who did venture west, a notable group were prostitutes. Brothels became common fixtures in the frontier towns, providing a form of companionship that, while not comparable to marriage, met the immediate needs of the settlers. Women working in these establishments, often referred to as sporting women, painted ladies, or soiled doves, found a niche in the burgeoning love industry. Unfortunately, the harsh realities of this profession left many unable to escape their circumstances, and their prospects for retirement were bleak. Estimating the prevalence of venereal diseases in the Old West is challenging, but historians suggest that around half of the love workers were afflicted with such illnesses. These diseases were frequently transmitted to their clients, and as men moved from one town to another, the cycle of infection continued to spread. Despite the efforts of women to protect themselves, the understanding of love health at the time was limited. Treatment methods were rudimentary and often dangerous. Remedies containing mercury, carbolic acid, mercuric cyanide, and boric acid were commonly used, but these harsh substances sometimes cause more harm than good. The true impact of venereal diseases on frontier communities is not fully known, but historical records provide some insight. Death certificates from the period sometimes listed cancer of the brain, a discrete term referring to the final, severe stages of syphilis, indicating the hidden toll of these diseases. Pioneers were really dirty, without running water, limited access to clean streams, and constant exposure to mud and dust. Pioneers often lived in conditions of persistent dirtiness. This was especially true for their personal hygiene. Men who spent long hours working in the fields returned home covered in grime, and the lack of accessible baths meant that the unpleasant odors only worsened over time. Efforts to address hygiene issues were made by knowledgeable doctors, but there were also many charlatans spreading alarming and often misleading information about cleanliness and diseases. For some, a visit to town for a costly consultation was promoted as a remedy for these supposed problems. Women faced even more significant challenges with personal hygiene. The numerous layers of petticoats and undergarments made bathroom visits cumbersome. In the Old West, pantaloons were often designed without crotch openings, forcing women to manage awkwardly while using the toilet. Proper washing and aftercare were nearly impossible, and the management of menstrual cycles added another layer of difficulty. Sanitary pads were not invented until 1888, and tampons did not become available until several decades later. In the absence of these products, women on the Great Plains resorted to using grass, cotton, rabbit fur, and sheep's wool. Some even used rags in their undergarments to stay clean. While douching was sometimes employed, the historian's observations suggest that menstrual hygiene in the Old West was marked by significant discomfort and hardship. Transportation in the Wild West. The journey to the Old West was often the most challenging aspect of the migration. Modern estimates suggest that between 300,000 and 400,000 people moved westward between the 1840s and 1860s, numbers that highlight the scale of the migration and the difficulties faced. Unlike today's paved roads, pioneers had to navigate rough wagon trails and treacherous terrain. The journey was further complicated by occasional hostilities with Native Americans and encounters with unfamiliar wildlife. Massive herds of bison presented a constant threat, often disrupting and intimidating exhausted travelers. Even after reaching their destination, pioneers faced difficulties with local travel. Rattlesnakes were common across the plains and deserts, and their bites, coupled with inadequate medical care, led to numerous fatalities. The weather in the West was harsh and unpredictable, differing greatly from the milder conditions on the East Coast. The rugged geography further complicated travel, making even simple trips to the general store a significant effort. For those living on isolated homesteads, the challenges were even greater. Oxen, horses, and mules were temperamental and unreliable, and wagon wheels frequently broke down. The wagons themselves suffered damage from the relentless wind, sleet, snow, and heavy use. The risk of drowning at river crossings was high, particularly since many pioneers could not swim. A notable example of these hazards is the case of Clay Allison, the infamous outlaw who died in a wagon accident in 1887. Life in the Old West was fraught with difficulties, and few aspects of frontier life came easily. Wild West beauty. Despite the many hardships of pioneer life, there was still a demand for beauty and grooming products. For men in the Old West, this often meant frequent trips to the local barbershop. Barbers not only provided haircuts and shaves, but also offered a rare chance for homesteaders to freshen up. They served as confidants, giving advice and lending an ear, and occasionally filled roles related to medical care. In the absence of dentists or doctors, barbers were sometimes called upon to perform medical procedures. In 1852, a barber in Northern California expanded his services to include a full-service bathhouse, much to the delight of local residents. The local newspaper boasted that the establishment was ideal for comfort, health, and even personal hygiene. Women, too, were the focus of beauty marketing during this period. Newspapers provided tips for maintaining a polished appearance despite the challenging conditions. Some advice suggested that women avoid heavy makeup to avoid being mistaken for working girls. Youthfulness was highly prized, and one prominent San Francisco newspaper published a full-page guide offering exercises to reduce facial wrinkles. Over time, advancements in technology, from transportation to healthcare, gradually improved domestic life in the Old West. Pioneers' children and grandchildren undoubtedly appreciated these improvements. From the challenges of basic hygiene to the surprising innovations in personal care, daily life in the Old West was a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of its settlers. These 10 revealing facts offer just a glimpse into the rugged realities faced by pioneers who shaped the frontier. If you enjoyed uncovering these fascinating aspects of Old West life, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more intriguing insights into history. Don't miss out on our latest content. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey through the past.